Hi everyone, my name is YK and usually I run a programming YouTube channel called CS Dojo. Today I'm here as a guest host on Towards Data Science and I have an interview with Jeremie Harris from SharpestMinds. SharpestMinds is a startup that helps people who are looking for data science jobs by finding mentors for them. I would say their system is kind of interesting in a way that in their system, a mentor only gets paid if their mentee gets a data science job. In this conversation, we talked about his startup, the data science industry in general, as well as the importance of paying attention to habit formation. Anyway, the first thing I asked him was about how he got started with his startup.
Well, I guess depending on what you mean by how, we could go back to different periods in time. But so our whole team is like former physicists, and we all either dropped out of grad school or finished grad school around the same time. Decided to go into startups, specifically deep learning. So for about a year and a half in 2015, my brother and I did this deep learning startup. Really stupid idea. We made a restaurant recommendation engine, and something that nobody really wanted, it turned out. But it was cool. We got to learn a lot of the infrastructure behind machine learning, deep learning. And then eventually we decided to pivot, and we went in the direction of just basically becoming a jobs board. We knew whatever we were going to do, we wanted to be in the machine learning space because we saw it was 2015. It was pretty clear that we were reaching the kind of inflection point where things were going to go crazy. And a lot of that's played out too. But at that point, we started playing around with connecting companies to students. So we're trying to help students land their first kind of gig roles and do little projects. And that's how we went through YC. We did Y Combinator with that idea. After that, we realized one of the problems with that model, anytime you're set up so that you're trying to match a specific company to a specific person, in other words, a recruitment model, anytime you're basically being a recruiter, there's this problem where you actually can't afford to care that much about any specific student or candidate. Instead, you're playing the numbers. You're just trying to throw a whole bunch of people at a whole bunch of jobs and hope something sticks. So very quickly, we realized what we wanted to do was be able to invest in people. We were always really good at teaching. We were really good at connecting with people, understanding like the ins and outs of job market, stuff like that. And we wanted to lean in that direction. So ultimately, we decided to take it in this mentorship direction with income share. We saw from the jobs board stuff that everybody was missing the same kind of skills consistently. It was stuff like, it's all well and good to have a Jupyter notebook where you're importing pandas and scikit-learn, but then like, how do you take it to the next level? Then the level you need to be at to get hired, you need to look at things like deploying models on the cloud. You need to look at things like a good Git flow, learning how to use tools like Docker, the sort of software engineering side of things that is under-recognized in data science, and that's what companies tend to look for. We kept spotting those commonalities, and we're like, who's actually going to be good at teaching this? The people who use data science in the real world, machine learning engineers, data scientists. And so what we went about doing was trying to figure out how can we convince a data scientist to work with an aspiring data scientist today. And that's actually really tough if you think about it. Data scientists get paid a lot. So if you're going to convince them to do this, to spend serious time working with a human being who's not quite ready yet, you've got to find a way to make it all fit. And income share was just immediately the natural fit here. Have people who are trying to break in, trade on their future success. Like, you might not be valuable today, but if you put a little bit of effort, if you get that mentorship, if you have somebody who can tell you where to focus your energy and time, all of a sudden you unlock all this value. And whenever you have a situation like that, that's just income share is a beautiful fit for that. So that was kind of the origin of it.
And then I asked him why he decided to go with this income sharing model instead of building a bootcamp.
Yeah, great question. So this is something we actually spent about it was like about 2 months thinking about, should we do a boot camp? Is that the natural fit? And the reason that we didn't was ultimately a mix of economics and ethics. So I want to take a step back and answer this by telling you a little story, something that's been happening to us in the last couple of weeks. We started to notice that we've been getting a lot of applications from, that is, mentee applicants, people who want to be mentored because they're trying to break into data science. So we got a lot of applicants who were TAs for university master's courses in data science, who were TAs at boot camps. We had a prof at, I won't name the university, but it's actually a very well-known, famous university, especially machine learning. We had all these basically data science educators who were coming to us because they were struggling to break into the space. And so we kind of sat back, we were like, this is a really big ethical problem. If you imagine like the people who are doing a boot camp or a master's degree in data science, why are they doing it? They're doing it because they want to break in. But if their TAs and their profs are also trying to break in, like it's the blind leading the blind. It's turtles all the way down. And so this was the scenario we saw from the outside. I mean, if you're a data scientist, you make 150, 200, 250K if you've got experience. If you're a university professor, you're making 100, 120K. It's like half the amount. So if you were good enough to be a data scientist, the question then has to be, I mean, you have to look at every prof you've ever had, every TA, every bootcamp instructor, and you got to ask that uncomfortable question, like, why are you doing this and not data science if you're actually that skilled? So for us, the question was, if you want to give a quality data science education, how do you convince people who are good enough to do it in the big leagues, good enough to do it at the Olympic level, the Googles, the Facebooks, even the RBCs, across that whole spectrum, right? How do you convince those super valuable people to invest their time coaching somebody younger, somebody less experienced? And that was mentorship. That was one-on-one income share. That's why ultimately we decided not to do a bootcamp.
Right. After this, I asked them if the data science market has changed much over the past 4 years.
It's changed a lot. Yeah, so actually, maybe I'll go back to my foolhardy days of like 2015, dropping out of grad school and going into this. So at the time, I had a couple of friends who'd made the transition in 2015. And the way they made the transition was they had a background in some kind of quantitative STEM, math, physics, something like that. And then they basically just learned two things. They learned basic Python, and they learned scikit-learn, NumPy, pandas. That was it. No Docker, no AWS, no Heroku, no Flask, no nothing. That was enough back then. And the reason it was enough is data science was in the Wild West phase. So if you imagine all the companies that were looking to hire data scientists because the hype was in and all their investors were saying like, we knew companies that said like, we have to hire data scientists because our investors say we should hire data scientists. Like that's a bad call. You should never do that. But it was happening. And so you could pretty much get hired with like a bare minimum of skills if the year was 2015. Around 2017, things started to mature. You started to see people asking for more and more as people started to realize like we've got to start transitioning from talking about data science as this magical thing that's going to help us predict the future and do all kinds of cool stuff. It's all AI. And we now need to start getting actual business value from this because like it's been 2 years. So at that stage, what people started asking for more of was stuff like, can you write clean modular code? Are you able to leverage like good practical like visualization libraries, things like Seaborn, things like Matplotlib? You were still mostly seeing requirements for libraries expand. It wasn't like the software engineering side had yet come into its own. Now you're starting to see that. Now companies will ask you not like, what Kaggle competitions have you played in, but like, okay, what software engineering do you know? What data pipelines can you set up? So it's a lot more about implementation now. It's much less theoretical, and that's just because of the natural course of evolution of the field. And it's still changing today. And you can imagine, I mean, like when you have a setup where you only get paid when somebody gets hired, and also, obviously we don't want to upset mentors by having their mentees not get hired. We need everybody to win to make this work. So you become really focused on tracking the changes in the job market and the changes in requirements. And yeah, so anyway, things have definitely evolved a lot. The direction things are going in now is actually really interesting. And we've had on our podcast too, like a bunch of conversations with people about like, okay, what's the future hold? Where is data science going tomorrow? And if you want to prepare yourself for that future, like what do you have to do today? And there are a couple of different trends emerging now. The data science job description is kind of forking out. So you've got, on the one hand, like almost software engineer who also does data science is kind of one of the roles. And then the other one is like a product-focused person who's data savvy. So like product-focused people answer questions like, what should we build next? And like, what do our users want? And how can we use data to inform those decisions? A lot of that is now becoming like modeling oriented, and you're seeing more hyperparameter tuning, more predictive modeling, more unsupervised learning too. So the role's sort of morphing into those two directions. It's still hard to tell where that's going, but like, yeah, we're laser focused on figuring out those trends as soon as we can.
Then I asked him if he has any advice for people who want to get into data science.
I think people are going to expect a technical answer to this question, but I think that the answer begins with something very deeply non-technical, and that's habit building. Before you can dive in, like, okay, so MOOCs have completion rates around 5 to 15%. So the average person who buys a Udacity MOOC, Intro to Data Science, is not going to finish it. MOOCs are, internally we call them aspirational purchases. Basically, somebody wants to be the kind of person who would complete a MOOC, but they actually stop short of doing it. It's like a New Year's resolution. So the first thing that you need to do if you're trying to break in is recognize that impulse in yourself. It's deep, it's ingrained in every human being. It's the people who, like all of us, start books and don't finish them. All of us say that we're going to get in shape and then we stop after January 14th or whatever. So recognizing that's the reality, the question then becomes, how do you actually start building habits? And there's a pretty famous book called Atomic Habits by James Clear. Russell, who's our CTO, he's really into habit building. We have SharpestMinds is basically big into the culture of habit formation. It's a big part of what we focus on. But the bottom line is to pick very small incremental goals that you can actually achieve, and then give yourself credit for accomplishing them. So don't tell yourself that you're going to knock out a whole 0 to hero Python transition in 3 months or something. Tell yourself you're going to build something really simple and straightforward and start to execute on it. The whole habit formation thing is a huge space, and I don't want to dwell on it too much, but it's really worth looking into. If I'm going to give a more technical answer, I mean, yeah, Jupyter Notebooks, and this is a bit controversial, there are people who don't believe this. I personally believe Jupyter Notebooks are a great way to start. Start with Jupyter Notebooks. Libraries like NumPy, Pandas, and scikit-learn are the key ones you're going to want to know. And don't try to learn just by looking up APIs, looking up looking up scikit-learn docs and reading them. Try to look at Kaggle competitions, look at blog posts, and just replicate them. At first, you don't have to know what everything, every little piece is doing. You can always, through more practice, more experience, you'll get to unpack things. But the goal is to just get your hands dirty. Don't be shy to hit Shift Enter and see what comes out of your project. That'd be my main advice, I think. And I will say there's a great MOOC called Fast AI. Jeremie Howard, he's so if anybody's who's listening has heard of Kaggle, Kaggle's a big competition website in data science. Jeremie Howard was the president of Kaggle for a while. I think he was one of their top ranked competitors for a long time. Founded a company called Analytic. They're massive and computer vision kind of med tech company. Anyway, really, really good explainer. Fast AI has a great course on, it has courses on deep learning and machine learning. And every year I go over them again just to stay fresh. It's actually one of the main things I do to stay on top of the theory and implementation side. So yeah, I mean, I'd recommend checking that out for sure. Yeah.
After this, I also asked him what his experience was like at Y Combinator.
It was awesome. Yeah, it's so hard to summarize in just one line or two, but I guess what I would say is YC is it's transformative for a couple different reasons. I think one of the key ones is if you're ever interested in doing startups, YC obviously is this it's this holy thing and everybody looks up to it. It's an amazing community and amazing kind of service they offer. What's really weird about it is that the advice they give on the inside is exactly the same as the advice that they give on the outside. So if you read their essays, if you read Paul Graham's essays, for example, or watch their podcasts, you're consuming the same advice they give to everyone. That actually really threw us off at first. And it threw us off because there was no magic. I think a lot of companies, we expected genuinely that we would see magic when we got into YC. There'd be something would happen. They'd open a Pandora's box and all of a sudden we'd be like, oh shit, that's the trick. That's the hack. We were looking for the hack. And there is no hack. And in a weird way, that's actually the biggest hack, is realizing that hey, it's just hustle. You just have to do it at a certain point. And having the YC partners there to just remind you over and over again, hey, you remember that advice I gave you yesterday? I was fucking serious about that advice. I don't know what you've been doing, but basically just having them tell you that they were like, that you should be executing on that, even though you already knew it, that extra little push makes a big difference. And eventually you start to internalize it. And I think that was the biggest take home for us from the experience.
And then I asked him about why he decided to live in Toronto instead of Ottawa, where he's from, or San Francisco, where he worked with Y Combinator.
In terms of the hustle attitude, in terms of the spirit of like move fast and break things, that you need to have that around you if you're going to build a company. There's just no way around it. And I would even argue, if you're going to be a data scientist, if you're trying to break into any space, surround yourself with people who are throwing themselves into it 100%. And for us, that was Toronto. This is the mecca of data science. I wouldn't even say in Canada, it's the mecca of data science worldwide. You've basically got 3 big data science hubs and machine learning hubs not in the world, but in North America. You've got Toronto, you've got New York, and you've got San Francisco. Montreal is also really big, but if I'm being realistic about the industry, it's those 3 cities. So Toronto was a really straightforward choice for us because that was where a lot of the infrastructure was. That was where a lot of our first users were. Now we have people internationally. We have a ton of Americans. We have a ton of Canadians. But this is where we started. There's also a great history here of like deep learning started in Toronto with Jeff Hinton. And so there's just this great also government ecosystem too. The whole city believes in data science. And that's something really special. When you're trying to push that envelope, people around you like recognize that when they push forward data science, they're pushing forward Toronto as an ecosystem. And it's been a beautiful thing to be a part of for sure.
And finally, I asked him if there's anything he'd like to add to this conversation.
Okay, yeah, right. Well, actually, okay, so maybe I'll try to give some advice that will generalize to both. Because I actually think if you're breaking into any space, especially if it's tech, data science, entrepreneurship, full stack development really doesn't matter. You're a startup of one. Like the only person who has 100% equity in you is you. And that means like when you take more of a startup first mentality, your problem solving attitude becomes different, your risk tolerance becomes different. There's a trap especially on the data science side, where people will convince themselves that they have like, especially they have like a university job, or maybe an RA or a TA, like part-time university jobs are the worst. There are a lot of like life traps that get thrown at you, and making that decision to actually like let that go and break in is really, really tough. But when you look at your life from the perspective of like not weeks and months, but years, a lot of these kinds of decisions start looking pretty straightforward. And it's very easy to, like a frog in hot water, let yourself kind of gradually go along. So I guess if I had to summarize my philosophy on this from everything we've learned from YC and looking at people actually making this transition, it's just starting is so much more important than anything else. And building those habits, like habit stacking, and again, I'll put in another pitch for Atomic Habits. I think it's great. I'm also going to pitch, actually, our CTO, Russell Polari. He has I think, russellpolari.com. He writes a lot of blog posts on the idea of sort of like self-hacking and habit hacking. And I think this is something that like not enough attention gets paid to. It sounds silly to talk about like, yeah, I'm really studying habit formation. But at the end of the day, I think there's a neuroscience kind of element to this. People are slaves to their limbic systems a lot more than they realize. It's like the brain, broadly speaking, has kind of 2 main parts, the cortex and the limbic system. Your limbic system is like the urge part of your brain, the part that says, I want to go play computer games, I want to have sex, I want to eat that Big Mac. The cortex is that sort of long-term meta you that sort of looks at your own decisions and goes, okay, that, let's maybe go on a diet. Let's maybe start studying now because there's going to be a long-term payoff. You're investing in your future self. So learning how to navigate that limbic and cortical you is a really big part of this habit stacking thing. And although it can sound silly to talk about yourself in those terms, I mean, I think there's no other way to change who you are fundamentally than to recognize that there's a part of you that you can access and manage if you think about yourself mindfully, that a lot of people don't manage, and then they end up basically you end up being a drone. If you're a slave to your limbic system, you won't do things like forego short-term reward for long-term reward. That's the only way to compound your own value as a human being. So this is a long kind of tangential way of saying I think habit stacking, I think studying habit formation, reading books like Atomic Habits, looking at blog posts that cover this stuff is just a great use of time almost no matter what you're going to do, startups, data science, or whatever.
Nice. All right. Thank you so much.
But thanks for having me. This was awesome.
Yeah.